As you approach the gaming table, the figure of a monster takes shape. You know him as Craig with 30 campaign notebooks, who's never run a single game. He's the guy that knows the king's brother's name, and knows the yield of the crops down to every ear of corn. It's the DM with World Builder's disease. What do you do?
I use Charm Monster.
Invariably, there's some sort of figurative monster rearing its ugly head in our tabletop games. It's rare that we can slay these beasts outright, so instead, we use Charm Monster.
James, I just got back from the doctor.
Yeah, I know.
Got some news, buddy.
I know you were... well, so how'd it go?
Well, my cholesterol's a little high
On
the good side, but I also have World Builder's disease.
Dude. Oh, my God.
Don't make a big deal out of it.
Listen, no, plenty of people with World Builder's disease live a long, healthy life, man. It's not, we're going to get through this.
I know, but their games suck.
Well, I mean, yeah, but it's like, that's
It's just part of it.
Are there any, did you talk about any treatments? How far along is it? Give me the details.
Well, I only have a slight case. It's because I haven't been running enough games, he said. I've been just burying my face in my campaign notebook.
Oh,
talking about like King Zaya McTeague's second, third, and fourth cousins.
Dude, I told you if we worked on Dragon Dragon too much, this was going to happen. I mean, honestly, I think I need to get checked out myself. We've been doing a lot of work and just haven't been running enough.
There are some signs like, are you thinking of names of 4 and 5, relatives removed from some of our NPCs?
Well, yeah, because just in case the characters...
Nah, you definitely want to go in. I would make an appointment as soon as you can.
All right, well, I think actually our next episode of our Charm Monster should be how other people can avoid contracting this terrible disease and just heading it off at the pass and hopefully it not happening.
Let's do it now. And scene. I'm going to open this beverage, too. I'm not going to say what beverage it is in case we ever get sued.
Nah.
I was going to say sponsored, and then I thought that sounds pretentious, so then I switched it to sued, and it didn't work. So this is Charm Monster. And today the topic is, of course, as you saw by our improvised, mediocre...
intro
improvised. So, but we are going to talk about World Builder's disease. What I want to do first is kind of define what I think World Builder's disease is. World Builder's disease isn't creating your campaign world. It's spending so much time on your campaign world that you're never running any games.
And I think furthermore, it's every time you start like really getting into the creation of something you think is awesome, you stop because you're worried about something else that affects it. So if you're in the middle of creating this really cool kingdom, whether or not the players are going to be there, you're fleshing out this one area and you think, well, no, but how did these people migrate here? And you're like, oh, okay, well, no, all right, I'm going to go back 100 years. I'm going to figure out the culture of these people 100 years ago and why they migrated, what caused them to migrate. So when they got here, what their culture is like. And it's like, no. Keep fleshing, keep doing the thing you love doing.
Right.
Because if you keep doing that, eventually you'll be at the beginning and you'll just, it's very dangerous. It is a disease for that reason.
Well, and so here's the thing. To me, the most famous case of World Builder's disease was J.R.R. Tolkien. And this is proven. That he essentially spent so much time on Middle-earth that it took him roughly 30 years to finish Lord of the Rings. Some argue that is how long it would take. Like, you shouldn't rush it and so on. My argument is, if you see the Silmarillion, then you are wrong. No, but there was definitely a lot of very, very deep side writing. Now, here's the thing. J.R.R. Tolkien was not running a D&D campaign.
Exactly.
It's worse for writers. So I think the interesting part is us as people who are game masters and even players to a degree, we sort of need a touch of world builder's disease. And that's kind of the weird thing. So what is the line? Because he spent 30 years and finally got his books finished. But what is the line? Where, like you said, is it that it's paralysis by analysis? What's the healthy dose?
So the way I usually like to look at it, and of course I'm not saying that I am not, this is a problem that I actively struggle with. The way I look at it is if, it matters, if the players are going to interact with it directly, whether it's a place or a thing or an object or a creature, or if, like, once removed, if the players are, if it matters to the campaign. So in a game I was running, we were launching a website and I didn't get a chance to prep nearly as much as I'd like. And right at the beginning, one of the players walks up to a temple. And in my haze of not having slept for about 36 hours, I didn't think, well, it's very important to know who this is a temple to. That was a little too little world builder's disease. So what I did was I made it up. Now, it actually turned out that I stole the name from another game I play in, like just hardcore accidentally used the name from from Barker's Winds of Sir Celine game. But the important part is, you need to know certain things. You need to know, okay, if you're creating a temple, there's a very good chance a player is going to ask, well, who is this temple to? And, what do they follow? And of course you can use, pre-made ones. But the idea being that in this instance, you need to know those things. And then furthermore, you have to know that based on whatever this is a god or goddess of, or, whoever this pantheon is to, you have to know what it's going to look like because of that. A god of war is not going to...
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Right now, I wasn't going to say anything. Right now, James's cat, who shouldn't be in this office, is walking on essentially a Rube Goldberg machine of noise making. And so, like, as she's walking, it's your desk. It's got so many things
Papers
that are like
leaning
on top of each other that I'm just waiting for her to fall entirely. And I'm really sorry. I'm sorry to listeners. I'm sorry to you, but I just keep laughing. Like just then, she walked and your player's handbook was going to fall and it tilted down just enough to make a little bridge. And then she walked off of it and it flipped sort of back up. I was like, this is crazy. I'm sorry. So you were saying if you're making a temple to a god of war.
So the important part is a temple to the god of war in my campaign setting, it's unlikely that would look, very beautiful and have a lot of like really nice filigree, unless there was a good reason. But generally, whatever it is going to match what it should, look like. And furthermore, like, okay, well, what does something sound like? You have to have some amount of detail.
Right.
But then if you start to, sort of like you mentioned earlier, if you start to wonder, okay, well, who are this god's brothers? And, why is he this god? And why, did this happen? And what is his deal? Well, depending on what the temple, what part the temple plays in your campaign world, that's not important right now.
Exactly.
It may come up, and eventually you may have to plan for that. And eventually you may have to, come up with those reasons. But until the players interact with something about it, it's not going to matter.
We have to let this happen.
All right.
No, here it comes. The cat. I'm sorry. This is terrible. This is the worst podcast. This cat. Come on. Do it. Do it. That cat is a genius. Like, anyway, so here's an example of this. If you're watching a political thriller, you're mostly going to see only the political ramifications of the locations that the people interact with. So, meaning to say, if your campaign, so exactly what James is saying, focus on the details that match the tone and the style of what you're doing. If you're running, even let's say a futuristic RPG, and you've got a group of soldiers. Soldiers are soldier-minded. So they would be thinking in terms of cover and high ground and things like that. So have those things prepared, but you don't have to fit, like James, what you're saying. If I know I'm running a military campaign, I don't have to prepare details that wouldn't have to do with the military side of things, unless that's directly part of the conflict. So, for instance, I wouldn't have to worry as much about the agriculture or the water flow unless it was going to impede their cover or their high ground, the things that they would be focused on. So I guess the point is, don't design things that aren't going to touch your players is one rule. And then the second thing is, the things that are going to touch your players, a good rule of thumb is only prepare the details that would be important to them.
Exactly. And the most important thing to remember is that it doesn't mean you can't flesh these things out. If you're really feeling you want to flesh out the agriculture, in this militaristic, futuristic campaign, there's nothing wrong with that. But if that's what you focus on, and then the game, it's time to run the game and you haven't prepared anything else, that's when you know it's a problem.
Exactly.
Because those things aren't going to matter. So if you constantly find yourself, you world build all the time, but you don't feel like you ever really make any headway, you could have a hint of world builder's disease. The other important thing is, part of the reason I like to only prepare as much as I need to, and that's a hard line to find, but we'll talk about that later, is because as a game is going, I like the players to have some say in it. Not even directly, but I like through their actions and things. You don't always know what the players are going to do. So the important thing is, you can prepare a bunch on the periphery, but if they, say in the simplest example, end up killing an NPC that was very important, that changes a lot of things. And, now I'm going to prepare based on their previous decisions in other sessions. So in that same respect, I only like to prepare what I need to, because later, something that I had a rough idea for might change. If I really set something in stone, it may, I may want to change it later, or the players may completely go the other way and I may never use it, and that can be dangerous. Or again, you can feel like you're not getting anything done if that's the case.
No, and so this is where it gets interesting. Because like we were saying, with tabletop RPG gamers, you have to have a string of world builder's disease. You have to have a strain of it in your body, because world building is more like it. That you need to have a strain of world building. World builder's disease, to me, the line, because I want to clearly define this, it's when you neglect something else in favor of world building.
Yeah.
That is the key, because it's like, well, wait, are you saying I shouldn't? What if I'm interested in agriculture? That's great, man. And if you've got the spare time, go to town.
And maybe work that into the campaign.
Sure.
Make it affect the players if that's what you want to do.
That's exactly what I'm saying. But what I am also saying is, if your game master has said, hey, for this week's game, I'd like for you to come up with such and such, and instead of doing that, you're working on the, flora and fauna of your world, to me, that's world builder's disease. Now, that's just one type. Let me tell you another thing.
All right.
These are the causes. This is to me what, and I made some notes here. The number one thing, I think, for dungeon masters and game masters, the thing that causes world builder's disease, it is a fear that your idea will never live up to the concept.
Yeah, yeah.
And not knowing where to start, and wanting it to have the epic scope and scale of what you have living in your head.
Exactly.
And so you want to deliver this fully finished, multi-million-dollar motion picture to your players,
Yeah.
and you have only one little tiny microbe of it finished.
Exactly.
So that's the thing. So number one, don't be afraid of letting it grow and develop naturally.
Yeah. Because that's the other important part, is your players are a very important part of this equation. This recipe is the word I was looking for. Because again, you may have this really amazing concept and idea for your campaign world, but if it's not what your characters want to do, or your players rather, it is never gonna, it's never gonna work out. It's never gonna match up. You're always gonna be out of sync because you want to do this one thing without the players, and the players, are an important part of that recipe of the. Well, yes, you can create everything, but again, the players might trample all over that. The players are always rather going to do something you don't expect, and something is going to change. And one of the things I don't like the most is preparing a bunch of stuff that I now can't use. So if I over prepare sometimes, and again, if something happens, in the game, again, this will always happen, that I didn't expect, then it's like, oh, I had this really cool idea for, something that was happening over here, but they left the continent.
Right.
They've decided to go a different way entirely. Now, again, totally different sort of concept and potentially podcast, but you can sort of transplant some of that and use some of the concepts later. But the important part is, if you get too specific in an area that you're not even sure the players are going to make it to, that can be very dangerous. And you can find yourself, again, for me, World Builder's Disease hurts the most when I feel disheartened after creating a lot. It's not that I don't create. It's that I create a lot of stuff and it either doesn't apply, the characters don't go there, they never hear about it, or like you said, it never lives up to what I hoped it would. So basically, I feel like for me, the line is, I always want to be having some sort of, what do you call it? Not validation, but I always want to feel good about the things I create, and that usually comes from the players interacting with it somehow.
Satisfaction?
Satisfaction, that's it. So the idea is, for me, I want the players to interact with something or even learn about something, even if it's just a little, a college that's very far away, or like this arcane thing, or if I'm going to tell the players about that in that session, I'm going to fit it in somehow. That'll be really cool. But if I create that and no one ever hears about it because it never comes up, I'll feel a little disheartened by that. And that, to me, is my World Builder's Disease.
Yeah, no, I agree. And so, how do you fight it? How do you fight it if you have it? And again, we tried to make some jokes, and hopefully we've hit some points as to how you could tell you might have World Builder's Disease. It's if you're so interested in fleshing out the world that you never let anybody visit it, in general. So one way is let people start visiting it.
Exactly.
Just start running some games. Now, there's a line, there's a balance. You have to have some things prepped, like we talked about, but everything doesn't have to be finished. I'll never forget Matt Click from A Fistful of Dice explaining how the Provokers campaign was planned. It was just a one-shot. He had the idea for his world, Aeronoth, but he made a joke to me once because I was asking him for help to come up with some concepts, and he's like, "Dude, don't make it overcomplicated." He's like, my whole Provokers campaign started with a dude on a griffin.
Yeah.
And, it's just this very simple idea. Now, he had a broad stroke. He had some history in his mind and so on, but don't be afraid to just start with a dude on a griffin.
Exactly.
You will find the tone and the ideas as the players help flesh it out, and as you let people visit your world, then you'll notice that they touch areas and start asking questions, or even, my favorite thing is when players are smarter than me.
Oh, man.
And they start giving me all these ideas that I'm like, oh my, dude, yeah, that's way better than the stupid thing I have written down in my notebook.
Exactly. And again, I think that is a very important part of the recipe, because, okay, so it sounds weird, but I have a rough idea of what I want my campaign world to be, but I just can't put it into words.
Yeah.
So I run a game. And in that game, I, act out what the NPCs would say, and I maybe come up with a few things on the fly because I didn't prepare that. And, the players have a really good time. They give me some ideas. The next time I sit down to world build, even though I had a rough idea of what I wanted my world to be, actively living in it myself and showing the players certain things and making snap decisions based on something they said or things that happened helps me in the broader strokes.
Yeah.
So every time I think, okay, this NPC, I come up with something simple like, this NPC is greedy. Bam. The way I talk to them. Okay, later when I'm world building, I'm thinking, okay, well, why are they greedy? Well, it's hard to find money, say, they're down on their luck. Well, why? Okay, well, because this other event is happening. That means that, the flow of the market people isn't as high. And suddenly, from this one little decision I made about one NPC during a game, I've come up with this whole campaign arc potentially. So, start with a dude on a griffin.
And I want to jump in there because here's where World Builder's Disease kicks in. I'm going to use the exact example you just used, and I'm going to give myself and anyone listening sort of the balance and the identifying mark. Here's the thing. As you work through that example, you got to the point to where something is affecting the market. Here is when you have World Builder's Disease. You start doing real-world research on economy problems so that you can put them into your world. Here's what I'm suggesting. I'm not saying don't do that, but what I'm saying is only focus on that when you need to.
Exactly.
It is okay. So the second way to fight World Builder's Disease, leave things broad until you need to focus in on them. Because not only is that going to allow you to focus on what you need to at the moment. So, for instance, You could even give it a placeholder name or a generic name, such as the market crash. Call it that. Then, as the players play in the game, as things kind of progress, you're leaving yourself some guns hanging on the wall.
Exactly.
If you've never heard of that, it's called Chekhov's gun, and it's a writing principle that states, don't hang a gun on the wall in Act 1 unless somebody's going to fire it in Act 3.
Yeah.
So essentially, don't be afraid to leave things broad, because what I've learned is a good DM or GM leaves a bunch of guns hanging on the wall in a campaign and then gives the players opportunity to fire whichever ones they want.
Exactly. And again, it's like, okay, in that case, the important thing, something that I said actually really struck a chord with me, is I said, okay, that gave me an idea for a campaign arc. I didn't say that gave me an idea for something that happens in the world, because to me, those are basically the same. If something is happening in my world, it's affecting the players. I don't build a world like J.R.R. Tolkien, where he's like, okay, well, this is happening and this is happening. I am, because I'm not, a writer and I'm not being paid for this, and I'm just trying to flesh out my world for my players. My audience is the players. So if there's going to be a market crash, all I'm thinking about is how it's going to affect the players.
Right. Now,
if that's where that real world research comes in for some reason, perfect. But it's unlikely that in my game, my players have economy degrees, because they're all adventurers, and, in game or out of game, they probably don't know, some of the nuances of economy, and neither do I. And it's enough for me to say, well, no, enough stuff isn't coming in, so they have to raise the prices, which means nobody's buying it. Simple supply and demand. It doesn't matter exactly, what their GDP is, or, what their main exports are. I'm like, no. If those things don't matter, I'll never know what they are. Now, sometimes you get that player that says, well, what are their main exports? And in that moment, you have a glorious time. You say, actually, and bam, their main exports are X, because, this other thing that happened in the game.
Right.
And suddenly you've tied two things together that you never knew would be tied together.
Exactly. And there are also those fun moments, depending on your play style, of course, where you could actually throw that back to the player. And you could say, hey, you tell me, what do you think some of their main exports could be? It is okay if the game has conversations in it at my table, because I can never stray away from the fact that the best, I think, example of what I'm looking to do is it's collaborative storytelling.
Exactly.
So while it's my job to come with something prepared as the master storyteller, I love getting the players involved with, hey, you tell me, what do you think some exports would be?
Exactly.
The other thing, and these are just little side notes, it is perfectly okay during the session to have this idea, and you say that the export is lumber, and it makes sense, and everything is great. And then that adventure's over. But in the prep for maybe the next one, or even two later, you think of something way better. It is totally okay to change it.
Absolutely.
At my table, anyway.
Yeah, for me too.
And to go back and go, hey, you know what? And for instance, let's say the characters, their homeland is actually someone who makes specific types of boats. Lumber export, that's huge, depending on how they're connected. But let's say they don't make boats, and let's say they're some sort of stonecrafters or, something entirely different. And then you remember that. Hey, this would actually affect you way worse because of X. It's okay to retcon some stuff.
And do you know why that's okay with me?
Why?
Because when a writer writes a story, writes a book,
I get what you're saying.
That's what they do.
They rewrite.
They think, okay, all right, yeah, first draft, this is a lumber export. Second draft. Now, in a D&D game, I don't have drafts. We're going to play one game, through this adventure, and it's unlikely that I'll ever play that same game with those same players again, because we've progressed beyond that. There's no reason to retread that ground. But a writer literally constantly retreads and constantly makes makes more sense and firms them up. That's how the draft system works. So the idea that, a writer may very well have said no, like J.R.R. Tolkien may have said, no, it's elves that live in the Shire. And then later he's like, oh no, actually it makes more sense for hobbits. In his second or third draft, he changed that because it made more sense.
Exactly.
In something else he came up with later.
Right.
So there's absolutely nothing wrong, again, to me, and in other players' games, I don't see anything wrong with that, because what is the problem? There's no integrity to exactly what has to happen in your world. Obviously you're not going to go and change something that, affects a player directly. You're not like, oh, well, you died between sessions because I decided to retcon it.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is that there's a balance, obviously, and that's actually a whole nother charm monster, but that is such a good idea to implement, which is if we're worried that our world is not going to live up to expectations or fit or something's wrong, that's one reason why we'll keep on world building. So if we know going in that it's okay to shift and change things, that's another cure for world builder's disease. So one final thing, and it's funny because I think one of the worst examples of world builder's disease symptoms showing in a session is when I'm playing a game and I get the info dump.
Oh man, that was me. I was that guy.
Oh, dude. I can't think of a specific one you did, but here's some... So if I start a game, I don't mind a cutscene. I don't mind a monologue. I don't mind something to get me into it. But if you've got to tell me this, to tell me that, to tell me that, to tell me that, and I'm 4 and 5 parts removed because you're telling me all this stuff, I am confused and I can't grasp the tone of what you're going for. So also, don't let that symptom show through. Don't try to show your players the whole world at once. It's so tempting to want to be like, and I've got a desert where this happens, and I've got this, and it's like...
Or like, so for me, to touch on it briefly, I had a really cool idea for what was happening in this town. And the mistake I made was the players didn't find out through conversations with NPCs. I even did it bigger. I did it even worse.
Oh, you did.
I didn't even say it through the NPCs' words. I said, well, he tells you about, and then bam, exposition. Like that moment in the movie where the scientist tells you all about this new strain. And the important thing is, had I instead just let them pick up bits and pieces throughout the session, because it was a one-shot, I think that they would have in their mind a way cooler, simpler idea of what was going on. Because again, we come back to that every once in a while, more often, honestly, than I'd like to admit, the players have really cool ideas that like tie up loose ends in my world. Right. And I'm like, I'm using that. I'm using that. Like, there's just no universe. So in that same way, I'm like, well, if I came up with all of it and, I drop it right on them, they don't get the satisfaction of discovering it.
Exactly.
There's no aha moment where like, oh, that's why this. It's like, oh, wait, what was that guy? Because you talked about it. Unless they're taking notes on your exposition, it's not going to have the weight.
Exactly.
And that is going to, again, take away from that satisfaction, which is going to make you feel like you can't world build because... For me, my players didn't enjoy something. I'm like, well, that's not a failing of the building. That's a failing of the showing. And again, that's why it's one more symptom of world builder's disease, is that info dump in the middle of a session.
Yeah. So 3 quick golden rules of not info dumping. Because you're like, okay, I have built this gorgeous world. I know the full map. I want everyone to know everything about it. First... Dude, do something this is totally separate. This is bonus. Do a podcast, do a video series, just talk about your world. Just get all that out because you're going to have user comments and things like that. Or talk about it with your friends if they're going to hate me for telling you that. That's why I said a video series or a podcast, because then people can listen at their leisure and you're not, you're not
info dumping out of game.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're not booby trapping somebody and trapping them at lunch for 4 hours.
Exactly.
But that aside, so only give info in scenes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're good at this and you're fine and you're comfortable enough to do cutscenes and exposition, that's okay. But don't let it become an info dump where it's more than like a paragraph and you're just...
Yeah. If you keep talking, if you mention more than 3 different people that the players haven't met.
And you're like, and then the desert, as you know, is that... I keep saying the desert.
We're in the desert. I don't know. I played a desert in a game recently. We'll go with it.
Yeah, sounds good. The second golden rule of not info dumping is try to describe the world through the perspective of your characters.
Literally the opposite of what I did.
Right. Literally. So that way they get to choose what's interesting.
Exactly.
It's like, and what do I mean by that? Well, ask your specific character, hey, what sorts of things would your character notice in a marketplace?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I would notice the quality of the silk because I'm a noble, or the quality of the goods. There's your opportunity to talk a little bit about the economy and the market. And
exactly. And you get to focus exactly on what that player basically wants to hear.
Exactly.
You're saying, hey, what do you want me to tell you about? And in character, they're saying, well, my character likes this. So not only do they get to flesh out their character and give more, and again, potentially get interaction from the other players. You have this whole awesome role-playing scene where you can tell them all about the economy, or you can say, all right, and now the economy. It's like,
yeah. And that
it happens both ways, but one of them is like so much more interesting for the players.
Exactly. So that also could be, I'm not giving you like a secret to info dump, but if you really, 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 really need to get, scratch the itch, have a scene in a marketplace and ask the characters what they notice.
Mm-hmm.
I guarantee you there will be at least a couple of different things. And you can use those as conduits to describe different parts of the world or that city or what have you.
Yeah.
So, and then the third golden rule is, and we kind of talked about this before, only give facts that relate to this story.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there's a economic crash. Well, that's an info dump if I start saying about how this affected this and this and this and this. What about this? You notice that most of the villagers here are more gaunt than they should be. And that, even the laborers seem to be getting more sick. And, essentially you're describing malnourishment,
mm-hmm.
which then the players will ask, well, what's causing this?
And that is the most important thing. The players will ask. You can info dump, but if you just give them a little bit, your players will ask. They will have questions for you or for other NPCs.
Precisely.
And you have the perfect moment to say, well, actually.
Exactly.
And it's like each time you get to do that, again, they have those little aha moments, and everybody, I think, has a better time because it's so much more satisfying for everybody.
Yeah.
If they figure it out or find it out.
Yeah, no, and that's so much cooler for the rest of the group too.
Yeah.
Because the players get a moment to hear, through their perspective. But exactly what you're saying, you throw out a little breadcrumb, limit yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
To a couple of sentences or one major point. So, all of that to say, if you have world builder's disease, these are some ways that you can cure it.
Yeah, I think the important thing is first noticing it, trying to identify that feeling that I sometimes get where I'm like, man, I did a lot of really cool stuff and the players just didn't even, they didn't get to it or they didn't seem concerned about it. And then if I look back, I'm like, oh, well, it's because I did an info dump, or it's because they didn't understand because I talked about too much, or it's because I found myself creating a lot more than I needed and that they used. And first pinpointing, okay, well, why do I feel this dissatisfaction with my world creation? And then, like you said, then figuring out, okay, if that is the case, if some of those are things that you find yourself suffering from, then you can say, okay, well, how do I cure it? And exactly what we talked about, different things about trying to stray away from just straight exposition and letting the players help you flesh things out are all really good ways to make you feel much better about creating a world.
Yeah. So those are, I'd say, a handful of good things that you can apply even immediately. But the thing I want to remind you is be a world builder. I want to close by saying continue to build worlds, continue to have fun. That's one of my favorite things to do.
Exactly.
So don't confuse this with don't world build.
Yeah.
This is do it in balance, do it in the right measure so that the reason that you're building the world isn't just to have a world, but it's so that people can visit it.
Exactly. And again, for me, so I don't get discouraged. I can do a ton of world building and then suddenly I'm like, I'm not really interested in that. And I don't know why. And it's like, for me, it's, because nobody knows about it. I haven't had the satisfaction of somebody telling me how awesome that was or how much fun they had in that world. And that is the kind of thing that always rekindles my world building flame. Is somebody saying that was really cool, maybe it's this or maybe it's that. Like somebody wondering about it is like, oh yeah, and I just dive right back in.
So that's the takeaway. That's your homework for this week is let people visit your world. Don't let it be a museum. Find one small part and just go for it. So in the meantime, this has been Charm Monster. I'm Tim, as always. I'm with James. You can listen to these more Charm Monster episodes as well as, other videos and articles at tabletopterrors.com. So we'll see you at tabletopterrors.com. And until we talk again, may your dice roll high.